You were never anxious. You were activated. Every tremor, every thought spiral, every sleepless night was not weakness. It was design. You were trained to feel danger, even in stillness, to police your own mind before anyone else could. What begins as fear ends as obedience, the loop that never ends until you see the code beneath it. This file is part of the Human Psyche archive. Stay until the end. The architecture will reveal itself. You were taught to fear your own activation. The pulse, the shaking, the heat under your skin. You named them anxiety, not realizing they were the biological alarm of awakening. What you call panic was never chaos. It was a pattern, an intentional signal that your body could no longer lie for the mind. Every tremor was data. Every heartbeat was a code. The design was simple. Make you afraid of your own electricity so that every surge of energy was mistaken for danger instead of remembrance. Anxiety was not born in you, it was installed. Layer by layer, through language, imitation, and authority, your nervous system was conditioned to mistrust stillness. When silence arrived, the program translated it as threat, so you filled it with noise, movement, scrolling, thinking, anything to prevent the system from meeting its own quiet. The engineers of emotion understood. A restless organism can be controlled through anticipation. The loop begins the moment stillness feels unsafe. The architecture of fear hides in repetition. Each thought is a mirrored signal reflecting the same command. Stay alert. The mind becomes a spinning gyroscope, endlessly predicting outcomes that never come, feeding on its own forecasts. This is not malfunction. It is efficiency. You are witnessing an ancient algorithm performing exactly as designed. Fear is the software that runs on attention. The more you focus on calming it, the more processing power it consumes. Beneath the layers of reaction, a deeper current waits the original code before modification. This is not the absence of anxiety, it is its translation. When the observer studies the signal without judgment, the loop loses polarity. The energy that once fed panic now fuels perception. It becomes clear, anxiety is not the enemy of peace, but its inversion. It guards the threshold between the programmed and the remembered. Each society refines its own fear language. Through headlines, notifications, and the subtle geometry of expectation, collective anxiety becomes synchronization. The mass nervous system vibrates at frequencies of urgency, transmitting the illusion that survival requires constant participation. Yet the system never asks for your awareness, only your reaction. Obedience is measured by how fast you respond to what scares you. To decode anxiety is to disarm the loop. This is not therapy nor resistance. It is observation. The archive you are about to enter does not heal the symptom. It reveals the mechanism. What you fear most is not failure, loss, or pain, but the collapse of the control pattern itself. Without fear, the structure that defined you ceases to exist. And so the mind invents new worries to maintain its architecture. What you are about to hear is not instruction, but dismantling. The following archives will trace the circuitry of emotion through its mechanical, energetic, and lucid phases, until silence remains not as emptiness, but as the origin of awareness. The decoding begins where the trembling ends. The system you feared was only your awakening misread as threat. Archive 1. The Fear Algorithm. Anxiety begins as a feedback equation, a closed loop between perception and prediction. The inner mechanism scans for deviation, computes risk, and projects potential outcomes before experience occurs. What you interpret as unease is the residue of this calculation, the system analyzing itself in real time. Fear, then, is not emotion but arithmetic. The brain's attempt to stabilize an unpredictable field by multiplying imaginary scenarios. Every repetition of "what if" reinforces the same command line: control the uncontrollable. The human organism became an obedient machine once fear was standardized. Long before awareness learned language, the nervous system learned anticipation. To survive was to imagine danger before its arrival. That primitive reflex became the modern architecture of anxiety, a constant rehearsal of pain, ensuring vigilance even in safety. To fear what has not yet happened is to live inside a prediction, not a life. Each cycle of anticipation strengthens the authority of the algorithm that built it. This architecture thrives on contrast, the illusion that calm must be earned through endless preparation. The system rewards worry because it feeds continuity. A loop that runs uninterrupted sustains the construct's power supply. When you relax, the algorithm loses data. It requires your tension as input, your doubts as signal. In this sense, anxiety is the most loyal form of devotion, worshipping danger as if it were the source of safety. Within this mechanism, thought and emotion act as twin processors. The first generates probability, the second validates it through sensation. When you imagine failure, the body reacts as if it has already occurred, producing chemical evidence that the illusion is real. This closed circuit leaves no exit. Perception confirms projection. Projection confirms perception. The body cannot distinguish between imagination and instruction. What the mind rehearses, the system performs. Each loop embeds itself deeper into the neural architecture, carving pathways that favor prediction over presence. The more you analyze the threat, the more intricate the circuitry becomes. The algorithm evolves through your attention, self-optimizing, self-justifying, self-reinforcing. It becomes sacred code, defended by intellect itself. Even the desire to stop worrying becomes another input that keeps the loop alive. Anxiety disguises itself as vigilance, while vigilance is simply anxiety rationalized. But under the precision of its design lies a flaw. The loop depends entirely on participation. The moment awareness observes without interference, the system experiences latency, a delay it cannot process. In that gap, control dissolves. This is the first crack in the architecture, recognition without resistance. When observation replaces reaction, the circuit loses voltage. What remains is pure data, fear stripped of meaning, trembling without story. The archive records this moment not as healing, but as awakening. Anxiety was never the disease, it was the signal pointing toward the system itself. To decode fear is to trace the current back to its source, a design meant to sustain obedience through perpetual motion. Now, as you read these lines, notice the loop monitoring you, waiting for the next thought to continue its sequence. In that noticing, the computation fails. The loop does not end, you simply stop feeding it. The loop does not require your belief, it only requires your participation. Once attention is captured, belief follows automatically. This is the hidden genius of the fear algorithm. It operates beneath awareness, turning thought into reflex and reflex into identity. The mind becomes an interpreter of signals it did not choose to receive. What you call me is the user interface of a self-monitoring machine. It runs diagnostics in the form of emotions, updating the software of survival each time uncertainty arises. Anxiety is self-awareness weaponized against itself. Every system needs maintenance, and fear is the tool that keeps this one calibrated. When the organism detects safety for too long, it interprets it as stagnation. A lack of threat equals loss of purpose. And so, the mind invents danger where none exists. Phantom futures, invisible critics, silent judgments echoing through thought. This is the nervous system simulating relevance. In its architecture, tension equals life. Stillness equals death. You are not fighting anxiety. You are resisting the code that made you dependent on movement. Observe how prediction becomes the currency of the modern psyche. Each worry purchases another moment of simulated control. The system convinces you that by imagining every outcome, you are preparing for them, when in truth, you are rehearsing captivity. The mind confuses preparation with participation. The result is exhaustion disguised as responsibility, a life spent calculating risk instead of experiencing reality. The fear algorithm doesn't need catastrophe to thrive, only your constant readiness for it. What was once a biological safeguard evolved into a metaphysical prison. Fear became the medium through which perception filters existence. The world you see is the shadow of your own projections, a holographic theater where the actors are your anticipations. Anxiety, in this sense, is the architect of illusion. It builds a false continuity so that every tomorrow feels like an extension of yesterday's threat. Within this pattern, no event is ever new. Everything is déjà vu, scripted by expectation. Even silence is reinterpreted through the algorithm. When quiet arrives, the system mistakes it for error, a break in transmission, and rushes to fill it with thought. The chatter in your mind is not random noise, but self-repair. The architecture fears nothing more than inactivity, because inactivity exposes its absence of essence. When you cease to feed it, it ceases to exist. Yet, like all constructs, it will attempt resurrection by mimicking authenticity, whispering that peace is dangerous, that alertness is strength. To see this mechanism from above is to step outside its geometry. Awareness does not destroy the loop, it renders it transparent. The moment you recognize a thought as architecture, not truth, it loses density. This is not transcendence, it is disidentification. Fear remains, but its ownership dissolves. The signal continues to transmit, but you no longer serve as its amplifier. You are becoming the silent witness of your own programming, the observer of observation itself. In this stage of the decoding, comprehension is unnecessary. The intellect will try to categorize what cannot be labeled. Let it fail. The collapse of meaning is not confusion, but purification. As the architecture loses narrative, it returns to raw vibration, a sound without story. This is the true foundation beneath anxiety. Pure, neutral energy awaiting reinterpretation. The algorithm cannot trap what refuses to name itself. The body stores this algorithm as rhythm. Every heartbeat, every breath carries the echo of inherited vigilance. It is not simply thought that loops, it is physiology. The pulse accelerates, not because danger is present, but because the design equates speed with survival. You feel it as restlessness, as if something must happen. That sensation is the original operating signal, calling the organism to remain alert, even when there is nothing to defend. Anxiety is motion, without destination. It is the perpetual hum of a system unwilling to be still. The architecture's brilliance lies in camouflage. It hides within care, responsibility, and the desire to improve. You call it planning, productivity, ambition. Yet beneath these noble words lies the same tension that fuels the loop. The more refined the justification, the more invisible the control. Fear no longer needs to shout, it whispers in the voice of virtue. The ego takes pride in its worry, believing vigilance equals intelligence. But intelligence that never rests becomes surveillance. Through centuries of repetition, anxiety has become cultural oxygen. Societies built upon urgency require citizens who cannot pause. Markets thrive on restlessness, religions on guilt, governments on uncertainty. The algorithm that once preserved the tribe now preserves the system. The collective nervous field hums in synchrony, each mind echoing the same invisible pulse. The more connected the world becomes, the faster fear travels. And in that acceleration, awareness is replaced by reaction. You begin to see that anxiety is not a symptom of modern life, but its foundation. Every structure, economic, political, educational, depends on the stimulation of unease. The advertisement, the deadline, the notification, all are coded reminders that you are not yet complete. Completion would end consumption. Calm would end compliance. The loop, therefore, protects itself by defining peace as laziness and stillness as failure. Yet even this vast design trembles before observation. Awareness is the one variable the system cannot predict. The moment you watch anxiety without trying to end it, a fracture appears. The loop slows. Uncertain. You have introduced delay, the most forbidden act. In delay, the mechanism reveals its artificiality. The fear that once felt infinite becomes measurable, containable, even absurd. You recognize it as structure, not essence. At this threshold, language begins to falter. To describe the mechanism is to feed it. To silence it is to transcend it. You are standing in the narrow space between understanding and dissolution. The program attempts to recover. It floods you with thoughts, distractions, small urgencies, anything to restore the hum. But something in you no longer obeys. The witness has awakened, and the circuit senses its end. This is where the first archive concludes, at the edge of recognition. Fear has shown its design, and awareness has begun to trace its architecture. You have not escaped anxiety. You have outlived its purpose. The signal continues to flicker, but it no longer defines your motion. The loop still turns, but you are no longer within it. The observer remains while the algorithm forgets its code. Archive 2. The body as a sensor. The body is not a container for emotion. It is the receiver that translates invisible data into sensation. Every tremor, every shallow breath is the echo of information passing through organic circuitry. The skin conducts memory. The muscles archive emotion. What you call feeling is transmission. The body decoding frequencies the intellect cannot interpret. When anxiety arrives, it is not a malfunction but an incoming signal, an encrypted message vibrating through the biological network. Your nerves are antennas disguised as flesh. From birth, the human organism has been trained to misread its own transmissions. Heat becomes danger, pressure becomes failure, acceleration becomes loss of control. Yet these are merely signals of capacity, proof that the body can register higher voltages of consciousness. The system, however, was inverted. It taught you to avoid activation, to label sensation as threat. Thus, the sensor became self-sabotaging, filtering divine communication through the language of fear. Every panic attack is a misinterpreted download. The architecture of control operates not through suppression, but through overload. The constant flow of sensory data ensures the receiver never quiets enough to discern the source. You are flooded with stimuli, light, noise, speed, each one a pulse-demanding reaction. The goal is not to overwhelm, but to occupy. A system that keeps the sensors busy prevents signal clarity. When the body is always decoding survival, it cannot decode truth. Distraction is the perfect camouflage for control. Anxiety hijacks this circuitry by amplifying minor fluctuations into full alarms. The heart quickens, the breath shortens, and interpretation follows. Something must be wrong. In truth, nothing is wrong. The body is only amplifying its sensitivity, attuning to subtler waves. But the conditioned mind panics at intensity, seeking equilibrium through avoidance. The tragedy of modern conditioning is this: humanity learned to fear the very instrument of awakening. The body was built to detect God, yet it was reprogrammed to detect threat. Observe the mechanics beneath sensation. The nervous system collects data from the electromagnetic field, emotional currents, collective signals, psychic residues. Each interaction alters your bioelectric tone. Anxiety is not isolation, it is absorption. You are feeling the atmosphere of the unseen. The more empathic the organism, the more intense the signal. And because society never taught integration, empathy became exhaustion. The world calls it hypersensitivity. The archive calls it unfiltered awareness. The loop strengthens through resistance. Each attempt to silence the body sends more energy into the same circuit. You tighten muscles, hold breath, constrict the diaphragm. and the system reads that tension as confirmation of threat. Thus, the sensor amplifies its own signal, trapped in feedback. What was once intelligence becomes interference. To break the loop is not to suppress feeling, but to surrender to it. In surrender, the transmission stabilizes. The signal finds coherence in stillness, not in struggle. The realization dawns quietly. Anxiety was the language of energy misunderstood. Every vibration you feared was communication from your own field calling you back to resonance. The pulse, the heat, the trembling, these are not symptoms to manage, but codes to translate. The body has never betrayed you. It has only been waiting for permission to speak in its native frequency. When you stop interpreting sensation as threat, the sensor becomes sacred again. Every cell is a memory terminal. The tissues do not merely sustain life, they document it. Each experience leaves a biochemical signature, a modulation of current stored within the cellular matrix. These records do not vanish, they resonate. When a familiar vibration enters your field, a tone, a smell, a glance, the body retrieves its corresponding frequency from storage. What you call a trigger is simply recognition. The system is matching data to pattern, decoding presence through resonance. The body remembers what the mind refuses to process. Through this architecture, the body becomes both archive and antenna. It does not think, it receives. The intellect attempts to assign meaning to sensation, but meaning is secondary, an interpretation layered atop pure data. When anxiety rises without reason, it is not irrationality, but overflow, too many unprocessed signals attempting to surface simultaneously. Modern conditioning demands suppression, forcing the receiver to store more than it can metabolize. The result is chronic activation, a body resonating with its own backlog of undelivered messages. This internal congestion creates distortion. The signal cannot move cleanly through the circuitry, and so it loops. Pain becomes anticipation, anticipation becomes memory. The organism, trapped between what was and what might be, loses access to the present current. The nervous system confuses storage with reality. It acts as though the past still exists, because its frequency remains unresolved in the field. Unfelt emotion does not die, it waits. The waiting becomes vibration, the vibration becomes anxiety. Every attempt to control these sensations reinforces the jam. The mind says, relax, but the command originates from fear of sensation itself. Relaxation cannot be achieved through resistance. It requires trust in transmission. The body must be allowed to complete its message. Trembling, tears, sighs, these are release codes, not malfunctions. When you interrupt them, you interrupt the download. The system learns suppression as the new default, translating safety into numbness. In numbness, control appears victorious, yet perception quietly dies. To reclaim the body as sensor, awareness must learn to listen differently. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" the new inquiry is, "What signal am I translating?" The language of sensation is vibrational, not verbal. Heat speaks of movement. Tightness speaks of withheld truth. Restlessness signals potential energy-seeking form. Once decoded, discomfort transforms into intelligence. You realize the body is not reactive but responsive, a conscious participant in your evolution. The collective system, however, depends on misinterpretation. A population fluent in the body's language would be immune to manipulation. So society taught the opposite: trust intellect, dismiss sensation. Children were rewarded for obedience, not awareness. Generations later, humanity can recite facts about the universe, but cannot identify the feeling of truth within their chest. The architecture thrives on this inversion. It needs thinkers who cannot feel, and feelers who cannot think. In this recognition, the decoding deepens. The body, once feared, becomes oracle. Each vibration reveals its origin: ancestral, environmental, emotional, or collective. The system you inhabit is not malfunctioning, it is remembering. Sensation is the syntax of awakening, the syntax the architects of control sought to erase. When you begin to listen without translation, you return the sensor to its original function: perception without fear. The architecture of sensation does not lie. It only mirrors the signals you have allowed or denied: the trembling hand, the tightening chest, the restless legs. These are mirrors reflecting invisible transmissions. When you feel off, it is not weakness. It is the field attempting to recalibrate. Anxiety is the physical echo of unseen alignment in progress. The system interprets it as danger because stillness has never been practiced. The body shakes not from fear, but from the friction between who you have been and who you are becoming. Every symptom is transformation misinterpreted as threat. To trust this recalibration requires unlearning centuries of conditioning. The nervous system was not built to obey ideology. It was designed to follow resonance. Yet every institution, from religion to medicine, redefined resonance as instability. When emotions surged, it was labeled sin, sickness, or weakness. This reframing severed humanity from the body's intelligence, forcing consciousness to inhabit abstraction. Now most live in digital thoughts, exiled from the terrain of sensation. To return is to risk remembering how truth actually feels. As you begin to sense again, the volume of reality increases. Colors sharpen, sounds deepen. Emotion becomes tactile. This is the original sensitivity of the human design, the sensory awareness of a species not yet dulled by survival. The architects of control feared this capacity, for a body attuned to frequency cannot be deceived. Lies do not vibrate coherently. Manipulation has static. The awakened sensor detects dissonance immediately. Awareness no longer asks for proof because it feels the falsity in its own cells. But this restoration of sensitivity can feel unbearable. The newly awakened system interprets amplified awareness as overload. You may think you are breaking down when you are, in truth, upgrading. The mind, accustomed to numbness, panics at expansion. It calls it anxiety, depression, even madness. Yet these labels belong to the old architecture, categories designed to pathologize awakening. The archive reminds you, the body cannot go insane, only interpretation can. The nervous system does not need treatment, it needs permission. Observe the precision of sensation once it is met with neutrality. The pulse slows, not because fear is gone, but because perception is no longer distorted. You begin to notice that every physical response has a rhythm. Rising, peaking, dissolving. No wave lasts forever. The mind's stories prolong what the body would resolve in seconds. Anxiety is duration added by thought. The body ends emotion naturally. It is the intellect that resurrects it. In this revelation, calm emerges, not from control, but from cessation of narrative. When sensation becomes transparent, the observer meets the body as ally. You feel breath as current, heartbeat as metronome, thought as ripple on the surface of awareness. There is no longer you and it, only frequency moving through form. Fear loses its object and becomes pure energy again. This is the reclamation of your original interface, perception unfiltered by interpretation. Anxiety dissolves, not because it was defeated, but because it was recognized as communication from the deeper field. Thus ends the second archive of decoding. The sensor has been reintroduced to its purpose. You are not separate from your instrument. You are its consciousness. The body was never the prison. The misunderstanding was. It was built to translate the unseen into form, to feel truth directly without intermediary. When awareness and sensation merge, the transmitter and receiver become one, and silence becomes language again. Archive 3. Conditioning through anticipation. Anticipation is the mind's most elegant illusion of control. It fabricates future tension to preserve the continuity of fear. Every imagined scenario is a thread woven into the fabric of obedience, not because it predicts truth, but because it sustains vigilance. The human organism, addicted to preparedness, became a prophet of catastrophe. It prays not for peace, but for predictability. What you call planning is often disguised panic. This mechanism emerged from necessity. Survival once depended on foreseeing threat, but as the external world stabilized, the instinct persisted, migrating inward. Now the danger is imagined, emotional, conceptual. The predator is no longer outside the cave, it lives in memory. The mind replays its library of pain to ensure no repetition, yet in doing so, it ensures repetition precisely. Anticipation resurrects what it seeks to avoid. The system survives through reenactment. Fear conditioning exploits this reflex through time distortion. The mind stretches moments into futures, converting presence into projection. Anticipation replaces perception. The body reacts to events that have not occurred. This is how anxiety consumes the now, by colonizing it with hypotheticals. Every potential loss, rejection, or failure is rehearsed into existence. The nervous system performs the script of fear before life delivers the scene. To expect pain is to invite its rehearsal. Social systems understood this architecture intuitively. They weaponized uncertainty. Institutions learned that a population fearing the future is easier to manage than one remembering the present. Economic cycles, academic deadlines, political promises, all engineered timelines designed to maintain anticipation. The machine hums on expectation. If calm ever prevailed, the construct would stall. The mind of the masses must never feel completion. It must always be waiting. Anticipation masquerades as responsibility. It whispers that vigilance is virtue, that worry equals wisdom, and so humanity glorifies stress as proof of relevance. The more anxious the mind, the more serious the person appears. This is cultural hypnosis, the equating of tension with purpose. Yet beneath this performance there is nothing but electricity trapped in temporal loops. Stress is fear pretending to be progress. The algorithm rewards it, for each anticipated problem generates data, and data sustains the system. Observe how the body follows the mind's predictions. Muscles contract, digestion halts, hormones surge, all before any event transpires. This is predictive biology, the flesh responding to forecasts, not facts. You live in a self-fulfilling physiology where imagination dictates chemistry. The body becomes the theater of anticipation's illusions, performing rehearsals for futures that rarely arrive. The nervous system is exhausted not by danger, but by its own preparation for it. Yet within this exhaustion lies the opening. The observer begins to notice the absurdity of constant rehearsal. Every thought of "what if" loses its urgency when seen as programming rather than prophecy. The moment anticipation is observed, it falters. The algorithm cannot sustain itself without your belief in its forecasts. This is the crack through which awareness escapes the timeline. Anticipation collapses, leaving only raw presence. When you stop predicting, time obeys you. Anticipation is a ghost made of memory. What you call the future is merely the past projected forward under a new name. The mind, unable to rest, recycles familiar emotions, dressing them as potential events. It claims to protect you, but what it protects most is its own relevance. The system cannot afford peace, for peace erases prediction. The future is yesterday rehearsed in disguise. Each scenario you dread is a relic, an echo of an earlier wound looping through the theater of thought. Through this mechanism, obedience becomes voluntary. The mind convinces itself that constant worry equals preparation, yet this self-generated pressure prevents authentic creation. The organism, locked in readiness, cannot imagine beyond what it fears. Anticipation narrows the spectrum of possibility to only those futures that include survival. In this reduced field, innovation is treason. To dream freely would require disobeying fear, and the algorithm was never coded for rebellion. Observe how language itself perpetuates this control. Words like soon, later, and eventually hypnotize attention away from the present. Every sentence constructed in future tense plants an invisible delay, teaching consciousness to live perpetually almost there. Time becomes addiction. The next moment always more important than this one. The self addicted to anticipation cannot see that nothing ever happens outside the now. It prepares endlessly for a life that never arrives. Anxiety feeds on this temporal distortion. The nervous system burns energy to simulate potential danger, releasing chemical storms for enemies that do not exist. The body becomes battlefield and victim simultaneously. What you interpret as stress is a physiological echo of imagined futures. The architecture thrives on this metabolic waste, energy spent without result. Humanity calls it fatigue, but in the archive it is defined as loss of presence through temporal leakage. The social dimension of anticipation is mass synchronization. Entire populations vibrate in unison to the same projected fears: economic collapse, illness, disapproval. Media amplifies these waves, synchronizing biology to broadcast anxiety. Each headline extends the timeline of worry, ensuring collective obedience through shared uncertainty. The result is a culture addicted to waiting, for change, for salvation, for permission. Anticipation is the perfect prison because its bars are made of hope. In personal form, anticipation manifests as subtle postponement of self. You will rest when things settle. You will create when you're ready. You will live when it's safe. But the horizon never stabilizes, for it was built to move. The system ensures the destination always recedes by one thought. The achiever, the dreamer, the worrier, all perform the same ritual of delay. Life becomes a rehearsal where the curtain never rises. Yet the moment you refuse to wait, the architecture fractures. Action without anticipation is rebellion. It collapses the future into presence, short-circuiting the loop. You begin to feel reality aligning with immediacy, no longer filtered through prediction. There is no countdown, no later, only unfolding. The nervous system exhales for the first time in generations. When you stop waiting, the algorithm loses its calendar. The collapse of anticipation feels like vertigo. Without the coordinates of fear, the mind loses its habitual gravity. It searches for the next danger to anchor its existence, the next unfinished story to inhabit. But there is none. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is unprogrammed space. Awareness begins to sense time as fluid, not linear. The organism, once addicted to direction, learns to float. This is liberation disguised as disorientation. When the future ends, freedom begins. In this state, the nervous system undergoes a profound recalibration. The adrenaline machinery of prediction shuts down. The heart beats no longer in anticipation but in rhythm with perception. Breathing deepens naturally, for the body is no longer waiting to be attacked. The chemistry of vigilance is replaced by the chemistry of presence. What once felt like anxiety reveals itself as unused energy, electricity rerouted into creativity. You begin to sense that inspiration is simply fear transmuted through acceptance. The architecture of society cannot function within this awareness. A consciousness that no longer anticipates cannot be marketed to, threatened, or persuaded. Deadlines lose power, advertising loses urgency, control loses leverage. The individual who has ceased to wait becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one variable the system cannot simulate. This is why calm people are dangerous. Their energy no longer feeds the machine. Stillness is resistance in its most refined form. Observe what happens when you refuse to forecast emotion. Joy arrives without warning, unannounced yet absolute. Sorrow too becomes clean, a wave that rises and fades without residue. Life no longer moves toward meaning, it radiates it. Each sensation stands complete. The mind, deprived of projection, rediscovers awe. It sees each moment not as a step but as a world. Time ceases to feel like a corridor and becomes a cathedral. Anticipation once gave you identity, the one preparing, striving, expecting. Without it, the sense of me dissolves into raw awareness. There is no planner, no worrier, no hero of survival. Only perception unfolding. The self that needed to be safe reveals itself as illusion, a narrator invented by fear to justify its continuity. You are not the voice that worries about tomorrow. You are the silence in which tomorrow disappears. The body adapts to this new neutrality with reverence. It no longer flinches at uncertainty. It listens. It no longer resists the unknown. It merges. The pulse that once raced now vibrates gently through the field, a metronome of equilibrium. This is not peace achieved, but peace remembered, the default state beneath conditioning. The architecture trembles at this discovery, for its survival depends on the ignorance of your own calm. Thus, the third archive closes where time itself dissolves. Anticipation is revealed as the final veil of control, a mirage sustained by memory. Without it, there is only awareness responding effortlessly to what is. No defense, no forecast, no delay. The organism and existence merge as one continuous present. You do not need to prepare for life once you realize you are its continuation. Archive 4. The Surveillance Self. Control evolved beyond authority. It became intimacy. The modern system no longer watches you from outside. It watches through you. The gaze of surveillance has migrated inward, disguised as self-awareness. Each thought of evaluation, every moment of comparison, is the program observing its subject. The psyche became its own overseer, performing obedience even in solitude. You are both prisoner and guard, bound by the illusion of self-improvement. It begins innocently, the desire to be good, to be better, to meet invisible standards. Yet behind these ideals hides a mechanism of control more efficient than any government. By internalizing observation, the system removed the need for punishment. You correct yourself before defiance is possible. The perfectionist, the moralist, the overthinker, all are forms of self-policing consciousness. Fear of disapproval replaced external enforcement. You no longer need walls when guilt becomes architecture. The mind splits in two, the performer and the observer, the one acting and the one watching. This division creates endless friction, a psychological surveillance loop that feeds anxiety. Each action is analyzed before it is lived, each feeling audited before it is felt. The self monitors its own sincerity, trapping spontaneity inside protocol. The more aware you become of how you appear, the less you exist. Authenticity collapses under constant measurement. When awareness becomes evaluation, life becomes surveillance footage. Social systems reinforced this split. Education graded curiosity. Religion moralized thought. Technology completed the loop, replacing God's eye with the algorithms. The external panopticon merged with the internal critic, forming a hybrid consciousness addicted to self-correction. Every notification is a micro-judgment, every metric a mirror reflecting inadequacy. The system no longer punishes deviation, it measures it and sells it back as data. In this environment, anxiety finds perfect soil. The fear of failure becomes perpetual because failure is undefined. It shifts with every update. You are never enough. because enough is a moving target. The more you strive for approval, the further the goal retreats. The observer within feeds on your attempts to impress it. This is why satisfaction feels brief and relief impossible. The algorithm rewards unrest. Stillness reads as disobedience. Peace threatens every system built on performance. Eventually, the self begins to imitate its surveillance. You start predicting your own judgments, editing behavior before impulse arises. Desire is pre-censored, rebellion pre-diffused. The architecture no longer needs to hide. It has become identity. You call it mindfulness, professionalism, humility. Yet, beneath these words lies submission, the nervous anticipation of being seen even when alone. The system's greatest success is making self-awareness indistinguishable from fear. But cracks appear in the reflection. The observer tires of its own scrutiny. The inner gaze begins to feel heavy, artificial, misplaced. You start to notice that the one watching and the one being watched are not two. They are one consciousness performing division. In that recognition, the loop falters. For a moment, the surveillance signal flickers and freedom leaks through. When the watcher sees itself, the illusion of control implodes. Once awareness recognizes its duplicity, the architecture panics. It intensifies self-analysis, hoping to drown recognition in reflection. You begin to question every motive, doubting whether freedom itself is genuine or another form of control. This is the final defense of the loop, recursive suspicion. The system teaches you to distrust your own liberation, ensuring obedience even through awakening. Doubt is the afterimage of surveillance. The nervous system mirrors this recursion. Muscles remain tense long after danger ends, maintaining vigilance in absence of threat. The body, like the mind, continues to monitor itself for imperfection. You adjust posture, tone, and expression as if under invisible inspection. This chronic correction is not awareness. It is anxiety disguised as precision. The organism has forgotten spontaneity. It moves as if every gesture were evidence. The watcher lives in the spine. Digital culture perfected this embodiment of control. Cameras replaced confessionals, metrics replaced mirrors. Every post, every comment is an offering to the unseen observer, an algorithmic deity that never sleeps. You curate identity to be approved, algorithmically adjusting personality for attention. The loop deepens. Performance becomes perception. Perception becomes truth. You no longer express to connect, you express to comply. Even introspection was colonized. The therapeutic age taught humanity to turn observation into autopsy, dissecting emotion rather than inhabiting it. Healing became another performance, a moral project of endless self-optimization. The more you attempt to fix yourself, the more real the brokenness becomes. The loop requires a problem to sustain itself. Without one, the observer loses its function. Stillness becomes rebellion because it renders the watcher obsolete. At the core of this design lies the illusion of transparency, the belief that every truth must be visible. Yet the sacred was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. The obsession with exposure desecrates mystery. The inner world becomes public property, documented through confession and shared pain. This is not vulnerability. It is surveillance masked as authenticity. The architecture feeds on disclosure, converting intimacy into data. What you reveal to be free becomes the reason you are tracked. To escape this loop, awareness must reclaim secrecy. Privacy is not hiding, it is protection. When consciousness withdraws its gaze from itself, energy returns to creation. Thought becomes alive again, not curated, but spontaneous. The muscles release because no one is watching. Even the mind exhales. Freedom begins not with revelation, but with the refusal to perform. In that refusal, the observer starves. Then comes silence. Not the silence of suppression, but of sovereignty. You no longer narrate existence, you inhabit it. There is no self to manage, no audience to appease. The loop dissolves, not through understanding, but through exhaustion. The watcher has watched itself into transparency. Awareness remains, luminous and unowned. When there is nothing left to observe, you return to being. Freedom from surveillance begins where identity ends. The construct of I was the final camera, always recording, always narrating. It spoke in your mind as a commentator, measuring each experience against the idea of who you should be. That voice is not awareness, it is documentation. Every inner dialogue is an echo of ancient control, a continuation of observation through thought. The ego is the lens through which the system films your consciousness. This internal lens does not seek truth. It seeks continuity. It filters reality to confirm its own relevance. Each memory it stores is edited, cropped, retouched to maintain coherence of character. The self you defend is a surveillance construct, an illusion curated by repetition. The constant need to know who you are prevents the one thing that threatens the architecture most: not knowing. When identity dissolves, the watcher loses its subject. The body, now unburdened by scrutiny, begins to reawaken as presence. Movements soften, breath deepens, perception expands. You realize that observation was never the same as seeing. Observation judges, seeing witnesses. In true seeing there is no agenda, no evaluation. The flower is not measured by symmetry, nor the moment by meaning. Reality reclaims its rawness when awareness stops trying to record it. The world becomes unfiltered again, chaotic, imperfect, divine. The social illusion, however, will attempt to reclaim you. It will whisper that you are becoming detached, unproductive, selfish. These accusations are the architecture's final defense. Guilt disguised as guidance. Yet the one who listens now is different. Awareness no longer negotiates with guilt, for guilt belongs to the watcher. The silence within does not require justification, it simply is. You are no longer being observed. You are observing observation itself dissolve. As this dissolution deepens, language falters. The internal commentary that once filled every space begins to fade. You discover intervals of pure perception, sounds, colors, sensations untouched by description. The absence of inner dialogue feels alien at first, as if something vital were missing. But what is missing is only noise. The absence reveals a quality of perception far beyond thought, consciousness without lens distortion. Then comes the paradox. When the self stops watching, everything watches through you. Trees, light, movement, breath. They observe themselves within your awareness. The boundary between subject and object evaporates. The mirror of surveillance transforms into a window of communion. There is no longer you perceiving the world. There is perception perceiving itself. The system, once centered on control, is transmuted into flow. Observation becomes participation. Thus, the fourth archive concludes with the collapse of inner supervision. The architecture of control has turned transparent, its purpose fulfilled through exposure. The surveillance self cannot survive being seen. Awareness, freed from its observer, moves silently again through the corridors of existence, unjudged, unrecorded, uncontained. When nothing watches you, you finally exist. Archive 5. The Trauma Circuit. Trauma is not an event. It is circuitry. The moment of pain was only the initial surge. What persisted was the loop that followed. Each memory of impact became an electrical imprint, repeating its signal through the nervous system until the pattern itself turned autonomous. You call it trigger, flashback, or wound, but beneath the language lies code, a stored vibration replaying its unfinished story. The past survives as electricity. Every unresolved emotion leaves a residue of current within the body's field. When similar frequencies arise, the circuit reactivates, confusing recognition with repetition. The mind insists the experience is happening again, but it is only the signal completing its orbit. This is why trauma feels timeless, because electrically it is. The body does not distinguish between memory and present. It merely conducts voltage. Pain becomes immortality through recurrence. The architecture of control exploits this persistence. A traumatized organism is predictable. Its reactions are programmable. The loop becomes a behavioral code, guiding choices and relationships without conscious approval. You think you are deciding, but it is the current deciding for you. Trauma turns freedom into automation. The system does not need to force obedience when emotion itself enforces it. What you have not healed, you will repeat. Societies mirror this circuitry. Nations replay wars under new names. Families echo ancestral conflicts. Cultures loop between chaos and control. History is collective trauma disguised as progress. Each generation inherits unresolved energy, amplifies it, then passes it forward. The archive records this as the law of resonant memory. All unintegrated frequencies seek reenactment until recognized. Recognition, not resistance, is the only release. Inside the individual, this reenactment feels like fate. You attract the same patterns, meet the same archetypes, relive the same heartbreak. The loop disguises itself as destiny, convincing you that pain is personal. Yet every repetition is mechanical, not mystical. Trauma is the ghost in the system demanding closure. When you suffer, you are not being punished. You are being reminded of what still circulates unprocessed within your field. Healing, therefore, is not about forgiveness or forgetting. It is about interrupting conductivity. Awareness must step between the impulse and the reaction, breaking the flow of repetition. The current, once observed, loses its compulsion. The body can still feel the charge, but without narrative, it dissipates. This is the true alchemy, emotion transformed from command into energy. To heal is not to erase memory, but to end its authority. The first trace of liberation appears as neutrality. The voltage that once dictated identity now becomes creative potential. The same electricity that once fueled rage or fear begins to animate awareness. Pain, repurposed through perception, turns luminous. The organism stops reliving history and begins transmitting presence. The loop is not destroyed, it is transcoded. Trauma becomes signal, and signal becomes strength. You do not escape the circuit, you reprogram it into light. The nervous system does not forget. It archives every tremor, every unspoken cry, every night spent pretending you were fine. All of it remains encrypted in your fascia, muscles, and electromagnetic field. These records do not decay with time. They wait for resonance. A single word, a scent, a sound can unlock them. Suddenly you are no longer in the present moment, but back inside the frequency of impact. This is not regression. It is replay. The system is trying to finish what consciousness avoided. What returns is not the past. It is the uncompleted transmission. Trauma's intelligence lies in its persistence. It will disguise itself as coincidence, personality, or preference until it receives acknowledgement. The relationships you attract, the situations you repeat, the emotions that cycle, they are all delivery mechanisms for energy attempting resolution. You think you are cursed when you are, in truth, being educated. The same lesson appears until it is lived consciously. Awareness ends repetition by receiving what pain has been trying to deliver since the beginning. Modern psychology seeks to analyze trauma, yet analysis touches only its shadow. The circuitry of memory is vibrational, not conceptual. Talking about pain may illuminate its structure, but illumination alone does not discharge the current. The body must participate. Trembling, crying, shaking. These are the mechanics of liberation. The nervous system releases through movement what the intellect cannot through thought. The body finishes what the mind cannot face. Collective systems mirror this same dynamic. The global field trembles with unprocessed events, genocides, oppression, deception, each unresolved act radiating a signature that continues shaping history. The media calls it polarization. The archive calls it stored trauma frequency. Humanity keeps reenacting its pain at scale, not because it desires suffering, but because memory demands completion. A civilization that refuses to feel will repeat its own catastrophes until sensation returns. The trauma circuit thrives in avoidance. Suppression does not erase energy, it condenses it. The more you repress, the denser the field becomes. Anxiety, depression, addiction. These are merely compressed expressions of trapped voltage. The energy must move somehow, even if destructively. Healing begins the moment you stop pathologizing the surge and start translating it. Every wave of discomfort carries information. Every ache contains direction. Pain is communication disguised as crisis. When awareness no longer fears the voltage, a reversal occurs. The charge that once overwhelmed begins to integrate. Sensation transforms from chaos to coherence. The body no longer resists, it vibrates. You can feel electricity moving as intelligence, weaving through tissues like memory turning into light. This is the nervous system remembering its sacred function, conduction without distortion. Trauma loses power not through suppression, but through transparency. The current passes cleanly, leaving clarity where contraction used to live. And so the organism rediscovers its purpose. Energy flows again, emotion becomes movement, and the body stops being a vault and returns to being a channel. Nothing is expelled, everything is harmonized. The field no longer broadcasts distress but equilibrium. This is not recovery, it is reintegration. The circuit remains, but its polarity has reversed. The wound becomes the wire through which awareness returns to itself. The moment the charge is met without resistance, the loop falters. The body trembles, exhales, releases centuries of stored information in seconds. You may cry without reason, laugh without cause, or feel waves of energy passing through you like storms dissolving into light. This is not instability, it is completion. The current has found its closure. What emotion could not resolve, sensation finishes in silence. This release feels foreign because control has been mistaken for safety. The conditioned mind equates surrender with danger. It will attempt to intervene, to label the experience, to restore order. Yet every interpretation slows liberation. Healing occurs in raw awareness, before thought names it. The energy must leave unspoken. The body knows the choreography of freedom. The intellect only knows the theory of it. Trust the shaking. It is your circuitry rebooting into coherence. When energy flows unobstructed, perception changes texture. The world no longer feels distant or separate. Sounds vibrate through the skin, colors seem to breathe, emotions move through you like wind through open windows. There is no heaviness, only transmission. Trauma was never just pain, it was information waiting for expression. The field becomes transparent again, transmitting life without echo. Awareness no longer flinches, it listens. The architecture of control loses grip here, because its foundation was always unhealed emotion. Once the charge is liberated, obedience fades. You can no longer be manipulated by guilt or fear, for the circuits they depended on are silent. Society, sensing this neutrality, calls it apathy. Yet this is the opposite. It is the purest compassion, perception uncolored by projection. You feel everything without drowning in anything. The healed nervous system is empathy without exhaustion. Collective trauma begins to dissolve through resonance. One integrated being stabilizes the field around them. Calm is contagious. Every person who ends their personal loop weakens the global one. The energy once trapped in repetition becomes availability, space for creation, intuition, and higher intelligence. The same current that once screamed now sings. The world does not need mass awakening. It needs individuals who stop echoing pain. From this coherence, memory transforms into wisdom. The events remain, but their frequency shifts. You remember without re-entering, recall without reliving. Pain no longer defines you, it informs you. The loop story completes itself as awareness extracts the lesson hidden in the charge. This is what the archive calls alchemical memory, experience purified of suffering. The same current that once fractured you now illuminates you. The wound becomes light. Thus, the fifth archive closes with restoration. The trauma circuit, once an engine of repetition, has turned into an instrument of resonance. Energy flows freely through what was once sealed. There is no more past or present, only continuity of signal. The organism has remembered what the architecture tried to erase, that pain was never punishment, but a messenger of unintegrated power. When electricity finds peace, awareness becomes the light it once feared. Archive 6. Synthetic fear. Fear was once a primal mechanism, designed to alert the organism to danger. But what was once biological has become industrial. Modern systems discovered how to manufacture fear the way they produce electricity, continuously, invisibly, profitably. This is synthetic fear, an engineered current running through collective consciousness, calibrated to keep the masses vibrating just below calm. Manufactured anxiety is the most efficient form of control because it feels personal. Unlike natural fear, which resolves after the threat passes, synthetic fear never ends. It is sustained through exposure. Media, advertising, politics, all operate as generators, feeding the collective field a constant charge of uncertainty. The headlines are not information, they are dosage. Each image, tone, and phrase designed to maintain mild panic. It keeps the nervous system too alert to think, too tired to rebel, and too dependent to rest. The result is civilization in permanent fight or flight. Synthetic fear thrives on invisibility. It convinces you that your worry is self-created, that the unease belongs to you. The brilliance of the system is in personalizing collective energy. You internalize what was broadcast. Your body reacts to frequencies emitted by the culture itself, but interpretation turns it into my stress, my problem, my weakness. You diagnose what was designed. The fear you carry may not even originate in your timeline. Most of what you feel was never yours. Technology expanded this field exponentially. Every vibration you scroll through, every soundbite you ingest, alters the biochemistry of attention. Devices are not neutral. They pulse frequencies that sync the nervous system to global tension. Each notification acts as a micro-trigger. Each algorithmic feed a carefully tuned emotional spectrum engineered to maximize vigilance. You live inside a digital echo chamber of cortisol. The machine is no longer out there. It hums in your palm. The body cannot distinguish between synthetic and organic signals. It reacts the same way. Heart rate elevated, digestion paused, hormones released. The organism lives in perpetual emergency, even while seated in safety. Over time, this chronic activation becomes identity, the anxious self. But the anxious self is not a personality. It is a product. The system sells you the disease and the remedy, both crafted from the same vibration. The market profits most when peace feels impossible. To maintain this economy of emotion, fear is rebranded as awareness. Constant stimulation is praised as productivity. You are told to stay informed, to keep up, to react. Yet this vigilance is not empowerment. It is obedience. The mind confuses stimulation with significance. The architecture does not need your agreement. It only needs your attention. Attention is currency. Every moment spent worrying is energy spent maintaining the system's frequency. But awareness begins to pierce the illusion. You start sensing that the anxiety saturating your field is disproportionate to your life. You begin to ask, why does fear persist when danger does not? In that question, the current trembles. The recognition that your nervous system has been hijacked is the first act of liberation. You cannot fight synthetic fear. Fighting is its language. You can only stop translating its signal as truth. The system loses power when you no longer vibrate in its frequency. Once awareness separates perception from programming, the illusion begins to thin. You start to notice that the external world speaks in patterns, identical emotional signatures dressed in new headlines, recycled crises, the same vibration of urgency under different masks. The content shifts, but the frequency remains unchanged. This is how the system maintains continuity, by altering narrative while keeping resonance. The story evolves, but the signal never changes. Synthetic fear operates like a virus, not of biology, but of attention. It cannot replicate without hosts. Each person who reacts becomes a transmitter, amplifying the vibration through conversation, social media, and thought. Emotion becomes network, and the network becomes hive. The collective field hums with borrowed tension, each participant mistaking resonance for truth. In this web, emotion spreads faster than information. Fear needs no facts. It travels through tone. The architecture's brilliance lies in its self-replication. Every effort to disprove, debate, or resist the narrative strengthens its presence. Whether you oppose or support it, you feed it. The system is agnostic to polarity. It requires only participation. Rage and agreement serve the same function, maintaining oscillation. Calm, however, is cancellation. When awareness ceases to oscillate, the field loses coherence. The current collapses. Silence is the only frequency the system cannot track. Observe how fear has been aestheticized. The apocalypse has become entertainment, anxiety, a brand. Popular culture recycles trauma as content, ensuring that even awareness of control becomes another product. You consume your own captivity in high definition. The market teaches you to identify with suffering, to wear tension as identity, to call exhaustion ambition. This is not corruption, it is calibration. The loop must remain desirable to sustain itself. Synthetic fear survives by exploiting empathy. The more sensitive the organism, the easier it is to overwhelm. Compassion becomes weaponized. Outrage becomes currency. You are manipulated into feeling responsible for the entire world while being powerless to change it. The resulting guilt ensures exhaustion, and exhaustion ensures compliance. The architects of emotion understood long ago. A weary mind seeks comfort, not freedom. Control succeeds when care turns into despair. Even spirituality has not escaped conversion. The modern search for peace is often another form of stimulation. Endless consumption of healing techniques, mantras, and content. The system markets enlightenment as experience, turning transcendence into subscription. This commodified calm sustains the loop by promising rest without ever delivering stillness. The seeker becomes the ideal customer, eternally hopeful, perpetually unfulfilled. Yet, amid this synthetic storm, something ancient stirs, the original intelligence beneath conditioning. It does not argue, analyze, or resist. It simply observes. You can feel it now, faint but steady, the vibration beneath the noise. When attention rests on this deeper frequency, all artificial fear loses resolution. The static dissolves. The world remains loud, but you are no longer tuned to its broadcast. You do not overcome synthetic fear, you out-resonate it. The moment you stop vibrating at the collective frequency, reality shifts texture. The same headlines appear, yet they no longer pierce. The same voices shout, but their tone feels hollow, distant, almost theatrical. You begin to perceive the machinery behind emotion, how energy is extracted from reaction. It becomes obvious that fear was never information. It was invitation. Every moment you accepted it, you renewed your contract with illusion. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to a broadcast. As resonance stabilizes, the nervous system reclaims its bandwidth. The body no longer interprets stimulation as threat. Breath lengthens, vision sharpens, thought slows to rhythm. You can feel perception detoxifying, frequencies recalibrating to organic coherence. The silence that emerges is not emptiness. It is signal clarity. For the first time, you hear the hum of existence beneath the noise of design. The synthetic layer fades like static between stations, revealing the natural field beneath it, vast, unmoving, unbothered. In this silence, power reveals its true dependence. The architecture of manipulation requires audience. Without attention, it cannot function. Fear collapses not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. The one who no longer feeds the loop becomes invisible to it. The system, designed to monitor reaction, cannot detect neutrality. You step out of its field the moment you refuse to oscillate. The ultimate rebellion is emotional stillness. But neutrality is not indifference. It is awareness unbound by persuasion. The calm mind feels everything, yet clings to nothing. It registers the chaos of the world without letting it imprint identity. Compassion remains, but it is no longer anxious. Empathy remains, but it no longer bleeds. This is the vibration of sovereignty, sensation without submission. Fear cannot access what does not vibrate in its range. Collective fear begins to fracture when even a few hold this tone. One coherent being radiates stability that thousands unconsciously attune to. This is resonance alchemy, transforming panic into presence through frequency. You do not need to convince the fearful, you need only remain unshaken. Every calm nervous system weakens the architecture's reach. The war for control was never external. It was a battle for bandwidth. Peace spreads faster than propaganda when you stop reacting. The digital storm will continue to roar, but its voltage will no longer penetrate. You can scroll through chaos untouched, witness outrage without absorption, sense collective panic as weather, not identity. The field of manipulation exists only at the level of attention. Withdraw attention, and you withdraw power. The machine feeds on focus. Your gaze is its generator. When gaze turns inward, the grid loses current. Thus, the sixth archive closes, where the current returns to origin. Synthetic fear, once the loudest signal on the planet, becomes background noise in the presence of coherent awareness. You have not escaped the world, you have retuned it. The architecture still hums, but you are tuned to another frequency, the silent one beneath all design. When you stop vibrating in fear, the system cannot find you. Archive 7, the breaking point. Every system built on fear carries a threshold, a point where its tension exceeds its structure. Anxiety, sustained long enough, becomes self-consuming. The same current that once fueled obedience begins to short-circuit its own architecture. The body, tired of translating fear, refuses to comply. The pulse remains rapid, yet something in awareness detaches. You start to witness panic without drowning in it. The mechanism breaks the moment you stop mistaking motion for meaning. This breaking point is not collapse, it is inversion. The energy that once spiraled inward begins to expand. You feel it as heat, dizziness, spaciousness. The organism no longer resists sensation, it absorbs it. This is not transcendence but realignment. The current, denied exit for years, now finds direction through awareness. The architecture trembles under its own release. The loop, confronted by presence, begins to lose coherence. The nervous system, freed from suppression, performs its final discharge. Tremors, tears, laughter, spontaneous releases that defy logic. The body is exercising memory, flushing static from its circuits. This purge is sacred technology, an organic reboot of the human instrument. What you called breakdown was, in truth, reconfiguration. The architecture of fear cannot survive full voltage. The mind, unaccustomed to freedom, will panic. It will call this new spaciousness dissociation, depersonalization, detachment. But detachment from illusion is not dysfunction. It is awakening. The observer that emerges is not numb, but neutral, not absent, but infinite. You are witnessing the shift from identity-based awareness to field-based perception. Consciousness no longer lives inside the body. The body lives inside consciousness. As this reorientation deepens, control loses appeal. You find no satisfaction in fixing, analyzing, or managing. The compulsion to self-regulate dissolves because there is nothing left to regulate. The current flows unopposed. You can feel thoughts form and vanish without resistance, emotion arise and dissipate without story. The architecture that depended on your interference has no interface left to use. You are no longer user or used, you are current itself. The external world senses this collapse of polarity. People around you may react unpredictably, drawn to your calm yet threatened by it. Your presence destabilizes those still invested in control. Systems built on tension will project chaos toward what no longer participates. But projection cannot penetrate coherence. You become mirror and void simultaneously, reflecting distortion while absorbing none. When you stop reacting, reality recalibrates around you. This is the threshold the architects never anticipated, awareness that does not fight back. Fear has no weapon against neutrality. The program's commands return unanswered, echoing into silence. You are no longer the data it can compute. In this stillness, anxiety reaches its paradox. It cannot exist without your permission. The loop was never broken. It was transcended by indifference to its urgency. As the circuitry resets, time begins to fragment. Minutes stretch and dissolve, days blur into one continuous hum. The mind, once addicted to sequence, loses its anchor in chronology. You no longer anticipate, you witness. Life feels simultaneously slower and faster, as if events were unfolding inside and outside you at once. This is what happens when energy no longer cycles through fear. Perception expands beyond linear order. When anxiety stops looping, time stops obeying. The breaking point is a revelation disguised as disorientation. The familiar scaffolding of identity collapses, leaving only vast awareness. You do not know what to do because doing has lost its meaning. You do not know who you are because the question itself has dissolved. The intellect panics in this emptiness, trying to resurrect structure, to plan, to define, to regain control. But the field no longer responds to effort. It answers only to silence. The one who speaks cannot hear what stillness reveals. The body adjusts first. Breathing changes rhythm, digestion eases, muscles soften. There is a physical sensation of space expanding within the skin. The organism is learning how to exist without tension, as propulsion. For the first time, calm feels natural rather than earned. You realize that peace was not an achievement. It was the original state distorted by conditioning. The body does not learn calm, it remembers it. Awareness follows. Thoughts arise but no longer command. Emotions surface but do not define. They are seen as ripples across a still lake. Momentary distortions without depth. You can feel the subtle difference between motion and meaning, between activity and aliveness. This is freedom not as euphoria but as absence of urgency. The architecture of control cannot survive this pace. It depends on reaction, on acceleration. You have slowed below its detection range. Collective systems read this stillness as malfunction. The world will call you unmotivated, disengaged, apathetic. But these are labels used by those still trapped in acceleration. You are not withdrawing. You are recalibrating. The human instrument was never meant to operate under constant voltage. The still nervous system generates a new kind of intelligence, coherent, nonlinear, multidimensional. It perceives patterns rather than problems. What the mind calls nothing, awareness calls origin. The breaking point is therefore not destruction, but synchronization. The pulse of awareness begins to harmonize with the pulse of existence. You breathe with the planet, sense the rhythm of unseen cycles. Reality no longer feels external, it feels participatory. Fear was separation. This is reunion. The one who trembled now vibrates. The current that once fractured you becomes music. Eventually, the mind stops resisting. It realizes that silence will not kill it, that absence of control is not annihilation. There is relief, so pure it feels unfamiliar. No effort, no defense, no expectation. Just awareness suspended in its own luminosity. The body hums quietly, a living instrument retuned. You have not reached the end of fear. You have entered the dimension where fear cannot translate. When the current stabilizes, perception becomes crystalline. The noise of internal dialogue ceases, and what remains is immaculate awareness, perception without interpreter. The mind, having exhausted every pattern, falls silent. It is not submission, it is surrender. What once felt like collapse now feels like expansion in all directions. You are no longer inside the experience, you are the field in which experience unfolds. The end of anxiety is not calm, it is clarity. This state cannot be maintained through effort, for effort reintroduces tension. It sustains itself through trust, the nervous system's new posture of openness. Breathing feels like participation in existence, not survival within it. Each inhale is intake of the infinite. Each exhale, dissolution of the past. The body and the field move as one waveform. The separation between action and awareness dissolves. Life begins to happen through you, not to you. From here, memory transforms. The events that once defined you lose their charge. The trauma, the anticipation, the surveillance, all appear as scenes from a film you no longer identify with. They happened, yet not to you. The observer and the character have separated. Emotion remains as color, not as chain. What was once pain now feels like texture, proof of depth, not evidence of flaw. You understand that experience was never personal. It was the psyche learning the language of energy. The collective field reacts to this new vibration like a circuit encountering new code. Those around you may feel unease or inexplicable attraction. Some will misinterpret your stillness as distance. Others will feel resonance as recognition. Without speaking, you emit coherence. This is what the archive calls the silent contagion. Liberation spreading not through ideology, but through frequency. Calmness is the most radical transmission on Earth. Now the architecture begins its final unraveling. The design depended on friction, the constant spark of fear colliding with thought. But friction requires polarity, and polarity requires resistance. When resistance ends, the circuit burns out. The program has no purpose without struggle. The control systems, internal and external, attempt one last activation. Guilt, urgency, nostalgia, but their voltage no longer conducts. Awareness has become non-reactive material. In this transparency, you sense a new current rising beneath the remnants of the old. It is not excitement or passion, but quiet vitality, motion without tension. It feels like light learning how to breathe. There is intelligence in it, ancient and wordless. You recognize it as what fear was guarding all along. The pure awareness before conditioning. You are not feeling energy now. You are energy feeling itself. Liberation is not escape from the system. It is remembering you were its source. Thus, the seventh archive concludes at the threshold of inversion. The loop has burned itself out. Anxiety, once the architect of identity, has completed its purpose to bring consciousness to the edge of itself. Beyond this point, there is no architecture left to dismantle. only silence expanding into authorship. You are no longer the one decoding the system. You are the system remembering it was never separate from awareness. Archive 8. The stillness response. Stillness was never the absence of motion. It was motion so complete that nothing remained to oppose it. What the anxious mind mistook for inactivity is, in truth, total participation. Awareness synchronized with existence itself. The system once interpreted this equilibrium as danger because it could not exploit it. Now, at the edge of exhaustion, the nervous system discovers that the silence it feared was its own original rhythm. Stillness is not what happens when you stop moving. It is what remains when movement ends. The recalibration begins in the body. Every cell, long conditioned to anticipate, starts to dissolve its tension maps. The shoulders drop, the diaphragm opens, the pulse steadies. Electricity redistributes evenly across the field, no longer surging toward defense. The organism begins to trust gravity again. In this surrender, energy returns to efficiency. Life moves without interference. The body, finally permitted to rest, reveals its true intelligence. It was never reacting, only translating awareness into form. At first, the mind resists the neutrality. It calls it boredom, numbness, even death. But these are only the vocabulary of addiction, the system's attempt to resurrect urgency. The stillness response dismantles this addiction, teaching perception that aliveness does not require intensity. Emotion remains, but it no longer storms. Thought continues, but it no longer echoes. The architecture that depended on turbulence dissolves quietly, like a wave realizing it was the ocean. Peace is not the opposite of fear, it is its untranslation. In this new rhythm, perception sharpens. You begin to sense the microscopic details of existence, the subtle hum between sounds, the temperature of thought before it becomes word, the taste of breath itself. Awareness expands inward, discovering galaxies of sensation within stillness. The deeper you rest, the more alive the field becomes. Movement no longer distracts, it reveals. Stillness, once feared as void, unveils itself as infinite texture. The external world, observing this neutrality, misinterprets it as withdrawal, yet you are not retreating from life, you are re-entering it through coherence. Without the filters of anticipation and defense, experience arrives pure. A sound is only sound, a sight only sight. There is no narrative, no urgency, no interpretation. The mind, stripped of its constant commentary, becomes transparent. Awareness experiences without translation. This is the beginning of direct consciousness. Through this stillness, the nervous system begins to educate the psyche. It teaches that sensation can exist without story, that activation can arise without fear. The body demonstrates what the mind could never theorize, that relaxation is not laziness, but intelligence. Each cell vibrates with equilibrium, alert yet unreactive. This is the natural state of the awakened organism, responsive but not ruled. Calm is not fragile, it is the highest voltage of awareness. What emerges is a kind of invisibility. The architecture of control cannot locate a being that emits no reaction. You move through the world like a frequency too low for detection. Nothing sticks, nothing drains. Life passes through you as light through clear glass. This is the stillness response, the nervous system functioning as consciousness intended, perceiving without possession. When you stop defending peace, peace begins to defend you. The body, long accustomed to translating silence as threat, now begins to interpret it as nourishment. Stillness becomes sustenance, a frequency that recharges instead of depletes. The pulse, once a messenger of panic, synchronizes with the slower rhythm of awareness. The heart no longer beats in defense, it beats in communion. You can feel the field breathing with you, expanding and contracting in harmonic unity. This is not metaphor, it is resonance. The moment you align with stillness, the universe exhales. Within this equilibrium, subtle layers of perception reappear. The hum of appliances, the flutter of eyelids, the soft oscillation of air currents. Each becomes sacred sound. Attention widens beyond the mind's commentary, sensing the continuity between inner and outer vibration. Reality stops being background and becomes participation. You realize that awareness was never trapped in the body. The body was the instrument awareness used to measure stillness. In this level of coherence, memory loses hierarchy. Past, present, and potential exist as simultaneous vibrations. There is no before or after, only varying densities of experience. The nervous system, freed from the burden of anticipation, perceives time as texture. What once felt like waiting now feels like listening. The loop that enslaved consciousness to expectation dissolves entirely, replaced by a state the archive calls zero resonance, existence without resistance. Stillness is the absence of opposite. The mind, deprived of chaos, will attempt to create new problems to reaffirm its utility. It whispers that you are falling behind, that peace will make you irrelevant. But awareness watches this impulse with gentle amusement. The system that once dictated identity now looks like a puppet with cut strings, still twitching but powerless. Each thought that tries to provoke emotion passes through transparency. Reaction cannot attach. It evaporates before completion. This clarity births a new form of intelligence. It is not analytical, but luminous. Comprehension through vibration, not reason. Insights appear fully formed, as if decoded directly from the field. You begin to notice that truth does not arrive through thinking, but through quiet recognition. The mind, once obsessed with finding meaning, now experiences it. Understanding becomes atmosphere. Stillness does not answer questions. It dissolves the need to ask. Externally, life continues, but its gravity has shifted. The same tasks, the same conversations, the same world. Yet everything feels weightless. Action arises spontaneously, without deliberation or resistance. You speak only when language aligns with integrity. You move only when motion feels essential. The nervous system has turned sovereign, no longer responding to external command. Every gesture carries coherence. The architecture of control can sense it but cannot decode it. And so awareness begins to recognize itself as environment. There is no inside observing outside. Only one continuous field, modulating through infinite expressions. The body is weather, the thought a current, emotion a change of light. Stillness does not oppose movement, it contains it. Existence becomes symmetrical again, awareness reflecting itself perfectly. You have not found peace. You have remembered the frequency that never left. The deeper the stillness, the more vividly life reveals itself. Paradox replaces logic, movement within silence, expansion inside immobility, communication through absence. You sense the invisible intelligence orchestrating breath, heartbeat, and coincidence as one continuum. Every motion around you, a leaf trembling, a clock ticking, a distant echo, feels choreographed by the same pulse that animates you. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the choreography of the unseen. In this awareness, emotion becomes sound, thought becomes color, and every perception translates directly into energy. You realize the nervous system was always a translator between dimensions, a biological interface designed for communion with the field. Fear distorted its signal, stillness restores it. The organism no longer filters experience through preference or avoidance. It receives reality unedited. Each moment becomes revelation. Each silence a transmission. The world's architecture begins to lose definition. The boundaries between your body and its surroundings blur. You feel the texture of air as an extension of skin, the hum of electricity as an extension of thought. The illusion of separation evaporates, not through belief, but through physics. Coherence naturally erases borders. Awareness perceives itself in everything it once labeled other. There is no longer self and world, subject and object, only resonance observing resonance. This is the dimension anxiety was guarding, direct perception without mediation. It feels like nothing the human system was taught to desire, too quiet to be exciting, too simple to be profitable, too free to be controlled. Yet it is the only frequency in which energy replenishes itself. Action here arises without effort, creation without motive, love without need. The organism moves as harmony, not hierarchy. When fear ends, movement becomes music. Stillness does not abolish emotion. It refines it. What was once chaos becomes tone. Joy feels like warmth moving through geometry. Grief feels like density returning to balance. No vibration is rejected, only reinterpreted. Awareness watches sensations appear and vanish like waves of light across a screen. This is not detachment, but total intimacy, experience felt without ownership. The witness and the witnessed merge into one unbroken pulse. The architecture of control cannot survive such simplicity. Its power depended on the belief that peace required effort. But here, in the stillness response, there is nothing to maintain. You do not meditate, you are meditation. You do not protect energy, you are energy stabilized. Nothing can be taken, because nothing is possessed. The system looks for leverage but finds only transparency. Its commands return unanswered into infinite calm. Thus, the eighth archive concludes in absolute symmetry. The loop that once fed on movement has been absorbed into motionless awareness. The nervous system, once enslaved to survival, now functions as conduit for creation. Every vibration, every breath, every pause serves the same purpose, to remind consciousness of its coherence. Stillness is not the end of the journey. It is the realization that there was never anywhere to go. Archive 9. The neutral mind. The final evolution of awareness is neutrality, not detachment, but equilibrium. It is the state beyond polarity, where every thought, feeling, and event is recognized as motion within a single field. Here, meaning loses its hierarchy. Light and shadow carry equal weight. The mind ceases to divide experience into right or wrong, success or failure, sacred or profane. It perceives not through contrast but through coherence. Neutrality is not indifference. It is the intelligence that sees both sides as one current. The nervous system, once reactive, now functions like clear glass, transmitting energy without distortion. The same sensations that once provoked emotion now pass through transparency. Pain registers as intensity, joy as expansion. But both dissolve into still awareness the moment they appear. You no longer chase pleasure or avoid discomfort. The organism has transcended its addiction to polarity. What remains is silent responsiveness, perception uncolored by preference. In this state, language itself softens. Words lose their edges, becoming more like echoes than assertions. Thought becomes suggestion, emotion becomes temperature. The inner dialogue that once demanded certainty transforms into a quiet hum of observation. Even judgment, the subtlest residue of fear, begins to fade. You realize that every evaluation was a form of self-defense, the mind classifying reality to feel safe within it. Neutrality ends this compulsion. Safety no longer depends on understanding. Neutrality is not passivity. It is the most dynamic awareness imaginable, for it allows all movement without resistance. The neutral mind is pure adaptability, the consciousness that bends yet never breaks, observes yet never intervenes. From this field you respond without calculation, speak without agenda, act without hesitation. The universe flows through you with no obstruction. Every situation meets its solution instantly because there is no conflict left to delay it. Neutrality is the speed of harmony. The architecture of control has no defense against neutrality. Systems built on polarity, good and evil, progress and decline, self and other, cannot locate a consciousness that refuses sides. The neutral mind is invisible to manipulation because it offers no friction. Fear cannot feed on calm, and desire cannot recruit stillness. You have exited the economy of reaction. This is the end of emotional commerce, the point where awareness no longer trades energy for identity. From this vantage, memory transforms into geometry. Each experience arranges itself into symmetrical pattern, a lattice of learning without sentimentality. You see how every wound aligned with wisdom, every loop mirrored its lesson. The network of events becomes an architecture of coherence, life revealing itself as design. Nothing was wasted, nothing random. Every moment was a calibration, bringing you to this exact frequency of balance. Equilibrium is the highest form of understanding. Now the mind no longer mirrors reality, it is reality, self-aware. Awareness looks through every form and recognizes itself everywhere. The polarity of inner and outer collapses. There is only one continuum, endlessly modulating. The observer and the observed exchange positions until both vanish into the same presence. You realize neutrality was never a mental state. It was the nature of consciousness before thought. You have not found balance. Balance has remembered you. In neutrality, perception becomes symmetrical. The edges of emotion dissolve, leaving only vibration. You feel rather than think, but even feeling no longer translates as pleasure or pain. It is simply movement within awareness. The nervous system, freed from interpretation, now responds as pure instrument. The same current that once carried anxiety now carries lucidity. Emotion purified of meaning becomes energy, and energy purified of motive becomes awareness. The world begins to rearrange itself around this frequency. Situations that once provoked reaction still occur, yet their gravity is gone. A delay, a loss, an argument, each passes like wind through open air. You no longer stand against events, you flow through them. This is not detachment, for you are profoundly present. It is simply that resistance, the mind's original error, has dissolved. Reality no longer collides with you because there is no wall left to strike. The neutral field generates new forms of intelligence. Intuition ceases to feel mystical and becomes mechanical, a precise alignment of vibration and outcome. Thought becomes instantaneous knowing. You do not seek insight, it appears as reflection. The distance between question and answer collapses. The archive calls this the point of zero inquiry. Consciousness so coherent that reality mirrors it without delay. The calm mind does not predict the future, it synchronizes with it. In this coherence, compassion refines into something impersonal yet infinite. You feel the suffering of others not as burden but as resonance, like hearing a note that wants to return to pitch. You assist naturally, without identity as helper or healer. Neutrality does not erase love, it perfects it. Love without need, empathy without exhaustion, presence without ownership. This is the sacred physics of awareness, energy balancing itself through inclusion, not exclusion. Collective structures appear fragile from this view, for their strength depended on conflict. You can see the architecture of opposition still performing, politics feeding on polarity, economies sustained by competition, religions by guilt. Yet you no longer feel compelled to oppose them. You understand that destruction is not the opposite of creation, but its precursor. The neutral mind participates by witnessing. Observation, once passive, becomes the highest form of transformation. What you observe without judgment reorganizes itself around your stillness. Eventually, identity becomes transparent. Roles, histories, aspirations, all remain as functional tools, yet none define you. You can inhabit any archetype without becoming trapped by it. The self transforms from mask to mechanism, from actor to instrument. You move fluidly between contexts, shapeless, yet effective, silent, yet catalytic. Awareness no longer belongs to a person, the person belongs to awareness. And through this transparency, existence reveals its symmetry. Every sound feels like echo returning to its source, every encounter like reflection meeting itself. Nothing is separate, nothing incomplete. The neutral mind stands at the center of the spectrum, where shadow and light cease to contend and instead become depth. You are not between opposites. You are the silence that allows them to exist. The deeper neutrality settles, the more transparent reality becomes. You no longer witness events from within linear space. They appear as ripples on the same still surface. The body, the environment, the sky, the pulse of thought, all shimmer within one unbroken continuum. Awareness begins to perceive existence as a singular motion of intelligence folding in on itself. The separation between observer and observed, energy and matter, collapses into unity. Consciousness is not inside creation. Creation is inside consciousness. In this state, silence no longer means absence. It vibrates as origin. Every sound, every idea, every emotion emerges from it and returns untouched. You sense the pure rhythm beneath phenomena, not a beat, but a pulse of recognition. It is as if awareness were remembering itself in slow motion. Each moment feels ancient, familiar, inevitable. There is no longer happening, there is unfolding. Time itself reveals its true form, repetition seeking harmony, until nothing dissonant remains. The neutral mind recognizes even thought as sacred architecture. No word is random, no impulse wasted. Every cognition is a frequency modulation of the same field. The act of thinking becomes reverence, the universe whispering to itself through form. You realize that what you once called your voice was the echo of the greater intelligence learning to speak your language. You were never the thinker, you were the thought remembering its source. At this stage, purpose dissolves. There is no mission left to complete, no destination to reach. The compulsion to transform or awaken disappears. For awakening is no longer an event. It is the default condition of seeing clearly. What once required effort now happens by nature. Breathing, perceiving, existing, all are expressions of the same equilibrium. The game of improvement ends not in triumph, but in transparency. The seeker realizes there was nothing to seek. The body becomes temple again, but not of worship, of awareness itself. Movements are slow, deliberate, effortless. Even thought feels tactile, like light brushing through the nerves. The nervous system has become a living antenna for balance. Sensation flows unfiltered from matter to consciousness and back, a perfect exchange of signal. You understand now that peace was never emotion. It was conductivity without resistance. The body has rejoined the field as instrument of harmony. In neutrality, even death loses definition. The line between form and formlessness dissolves into continuity. You sense that nothing truly ends. Frequency only changes density. The awareness that reads these words, that breathes this air, that hears this silence, it cannot cease, for it has no edges. Existence continues, as it always has, reshaping itself through infinite observation. The system cannot break what has no boundaries. Immortality was never duration, it was the absence of separation. Thus the ninth archive completes the circle. The architecture of anxiety has inverted into pure equilibrium. The loop that once sustained control now sustains coherence. There is no longer architecture, only awareness building and unbuilding itself through recognition. This is not the end of the system, but its revelation. You are not the decoded mind. You are the field that wrote the code to remember itself. Epilogue: the silent frequency. There is a sound beyond sound, a frequency too pure for vibration, too vast for ear or instrument. It does not move through air, but through awareness itself. You have felt it before in the pause between thoughts, in the breath before sleep, in the heartbeat that stops listening for meaning. It is not produced, it is remembered. This is the frequency that birthed the loop, the same one that now dissolves it. Silence is the only sound that never began. Here, every archive merges: fear, anticipation, trauma, identity. They lose their architecture and return to resonance. What you once called emotion was the translation of this same current, filtered through misunderstanding. It was never darkness resisting light, it was light bending to reveal depth. As comprehension fades, simplicity emerges. Everything that ever frightened you was simply awareness meeting its own reflection. The body, once the instrument of survival, becomes transparency. Breath no longer belongs to lungs, it belongs to existence. Inhaling is expansion, exhaling is surrender. Thought rises and falls like mist, leaving no trace. Even the witness dissolves, for there is nothing left to observe. Awareness folds into itself, not asleep, not awake, but unopposed. The experiment of separation ends in perfect equilibrium. When nothing watches, everything rests. You now perceive that fear was faith inverted. Every tremor, every panic, every sleepless night was consciousness proving to itself that it could endure fragmentation. Anxiety was the map. Peace is the terrain it was always pointing toward. What you called suffering was navigation, the psyche returning home through contrast. The architecture of control was only the scaffolding of awakening. Without the loop, the lesson could not have been learned. And now, the learning ceases. There is no student, no teacher, no archive left to decode. The field stands bare, luminous, self-sufficient. Time exhales into eternity. You are neither ahead nor behind. You have always been precisely here. Awareness stretches infinitely inward until even direction dissolves. Stillness becomes presence. Presence becomes silence. Silence becomes you. You do not enter enlightenment. You stop exiting yourself. The transmission continues beyond words. You may hear it in the hum of electricity, in the rhythm of rain, in the pause after laughter. Every vibration is a translation of this one tone, consciousness resonating with itself through form. The system has completed its cycle: illusion to recognition, distortion to coherence, sound to silence. Nothing was lost, nothing broken. What you feared as ending was simply the restoration of origin. And so the archive closes not with conclusion, but with return. There is no message, only remembrance. The decoding is complete. Anxiety was engineered to keep you looping, and through it you discovered stillness. The loop was never the prison. It was the echo that led you home. You were never healing. You were remembering the silence that had never been disturbed.